Committee on Education and the Workforce will come to order. A quorum being present, the committee meets today to consider H.J. Res. 88. Given time constraints, I ask that members insert any written statements into the record. I'll hold the record open until the end of the day in order to accommodate those members who may not have prepared written statements. And I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning. Today, the committee will consider H.J. Res. 88, a resolution to block a harmful new regulation that will restrict access to affordable retirement advice. I'd like to begin by thanking our colleague, Dr. Rowe, for his leadership on this very important issue. Since 2011, he has served as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions, and throughout his service as chairman, he has helped lead the fight for responsible policies that would strengthen the retirement security of working families. In fact, Dr. Rowe has led our efforts to hold the Department of Labor accountable for its attempt to rewrite the rules governing investment advice. We have spent a lot of time in recent years focusing on this issue because it is vitally important to millions of low and middle income families. It is vitally important to our small business owners and the men and women they employ, and it is vitally important to the health and well-being of our nation's future. Since this regulatory process began roughly 6 years ago, we made it clear that we believe there should be greater protections for those investing and planning for retirement. We also made it clear that we would not support a regulatory regime that restricts access to affordable financial advice and makes it harder for working families to save for retirement. Unfortunately, that is precisely what we have today. Despite the significant concerns of policymakers on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the Capitol, the Department charged ahead with an extreme partisan regulation. The final rule does include some modest changes that will no doubt appease a few detractors. But make no mistake, the rule is still fundamentally flawed and harmful to those saving for their retirement. The Department's final rule will still encourage frivolous litigation and drive up costs for those who can least afford it. The rule will still limit the educational information people with IRAs can receive. The rule will still hinder access to certain options individuals have to plan for their retirement, and the rule will still make it harder for small businesses to provide retirement options for their workers. Dramatic change imposed on the lives of working Americans will drive up the cost of retirement advice and force people to lose access to the trusted advisors. That's what this is. Regardless of the rhetoric we hear about the rule and why it's necessary, it will be low and middle income families who are hit the hardest. The wealthiest Americans won't feel a thing. They will continue to pay high-priced advisors to manage the details of their investments and retirement portfolios, just like they did before this rule. Wealthy Americans can afford to pay for this level of financial assistance. Low and middle income families, on the other hand, cannot. As is often the case, the very men and women we want to protect will be hurt the most. The fact that this all could have been avoided makes it even more unfortunate. There is broad bipartisan agreement we need to strengthen protections for those saving for retirement. Republicans and Democrats even agree financial advisors should be required to serve their clients' best interest. Again, thanks to the leadership of Dr. Rowe, Congress has put forward a responsible bipartisan alternative that would strengthen protections without hurting middle-class families and small businesses. This bipartisan consensus should have been the basis for meaningful, responsible reforms. Instead, the administration took the old my way or the highway approach in spite of the costs and consequences. That's why we're here today. Congress should not accept a flawed partisan rule when there is a responsible bipartisan alternative. More importantly, Congress should not stand by and allow a federal regulation to create this much havoc in the lives of the American people. Since the Department began its rulemaking in 2011, this committee has kept an open mind in the hopes that the Department would get this right. Ultimately, our response to the final rule is based on a simple question. Will it make it easier or harder for working families to save for retirement? Because the final rule is too expansive, too complex, and too restrictive, there is little doubt that it will be a significant obstacle to the retirement security every family deserves. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution so we can block a harmful rule, keep working toward a responsible bipartisan alternative, and protect hardworking men and women saving for retirement. And with that, I will now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Scott, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And today the committee is marking up H.J. Res. 88, a joint resolution disapproving Department of Labor's conflict of interest rule. This Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval would undo the department's final rule that simply ensures that financial advisors act in the best interest of their clients. This CRA resolution should be rejected for what it is, an effort to allow some brokers to continue to put their own interests ahead of the interests of their clients. It seems that some investment advisors are concerned that their business model won't work if they're not allowed to cheat people out of their hard-earned retirement savings. This is not a business model that needs protection. Now, for far too long, certain financial advisors have been able to exploit loopholes in a decades-old regulation that governs investment advice for retirement savers. Right now, financial advisors can easily steer retirement clients towards financial products that may yield their investment advisor a big commission, but may not be in their client's best interest. That is exactly what at least some of them do. And this unscrupulous practice of providing what is referred to as conflicted advice insidiously erodes workers' retirement nest egg. We have to make clear this rule only applies to retirement funds, not other investment funds. So according to the White House, retirement savers lose about $17 billion a year as a result of receiving conflicted advice about their retirement savings. The most common point at which conflicted advice occurs is when workers are about to retire and roll over their employer-based retirement account, such as a 401k, into an IRA or other financial product. Under the old rule, the advisor providing these rules with individualized and one-time retirement investment advice did not have to abide by fiduciary rules. Yet workers will often believe that their advisor has a duty to act in their best interest, but this is not always the case. According to the White House, and I quote, "A typical worker who receives conflicted advice when rolling over a 401k balance into an IRA at age 45 will lose an estimated 17% of their account by age 65. Looked at another way, if a worker has $100,000 in savings at age 45 without conflicted advice, it would grow to an estimated $216,000 by age 65, adjusted for inflation. But if the worker receives conflicted advice, it would grow to $179,000, a loss of $37,000 or 17%. The Department of Labor recognized the magnitude of this problem and took action to protect workers' retirement savings. Nearly 6 years ago, they put forward a proposed rule, and after considering input from the industry, they withdrew that rule in October 2011 and started again. Last April, the Department reproposed a rule, and since then, they have conducted a thorough and transparent rulemaking process. Over the past year, the Department conducted hundreds of meetings on the rule and provided the American public and industry representatives nearly 6 months to weigh in on the proposal. Secretary Perez and his colleagues listened and repeatedly assured industry officials, members of Congress, and other stakeholders that the final rule would reflect their input and that the department would get it right. I believe that they did. The final rule strikes the appropriate balance between addressing legitimate congressional, industry, and other stakeholder concerns without compromising its main goal, ensuring that retirement clients receive investment advice that's in their best interest. A broad and diverse coalition of stakeholders representing consumers, including the AARP, AFL-CIO, Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, NAACP, National Council of La Raza, and many more have registered their strong support for the rule. In their joint letter in support of the rule, the coalition said, and I quote, it will at long last require all financial professionals who provide retirement advice, investment advice, to put their clients' best interest ahead of their own financial interests. By taking this essential step, the rule will help all Americans, many of whom are responsible for making their own decisions about how to invest their retirement savings, to keep more of their hard-earned savings so they can enjoy a more financially secure and independent retirement. But let's be clear. The support for the final rule is not limited to those organizations that traditionally support the interests of workers and consumers. Initial reactions from many financial service firms and industry officials have also been positive and supportive of the final rule. For example, the head of Merrill Lynch Wealth Management said that they, and I quote, "We're pleased that Secretary Perez and the Department of Labor staff have worked to address many practical concerns raised during the comment period." The president and CEO of TIAA said, and I quote, "Based on our preliminary analysis, it appears the department has gone a long way towards making the best interest standard the industry standard." Morgan Stanley issued a statement saying the Department of Labor's final version of the fiduciary rule was, and I quote, meaningfully softened in several respects. Others are still taking time to review and have reserved judgment until they figure out this 1,000-page rule's full implications. And that's understandable. After all, it's been less than 2 weeks since the rule was finalized and published in the Federal Register. But reserving judgment is not what we're doing here today. Instead, the committee is rushing to mark up a resolution of disapproval that was introduced just 2 days ago. On top of that, only 13 days have elapsed between the publication of the final rule and today's markup. According to the Congressional Research Service, this is the shortest time span ever between the issuance or publication of a final rule and a House or Senate committee's CRA markup. So, congratulations, Mr. Chairman. You broke the previous record of 25 days. But in all seriousness, this hastily considered partisan resolution should not be where the committee should be allocating its time and resources. Instead, we should be helping workers make ends meet by taking up legislation that would boost workers' wages, help workers achieve better balance between work and family life, level the playing field by strengthening protections from discrimination so all workers have a fair shot, and strengthening workers' ability to have a safe and secure retirement. This has been and will remain the focus of committee Democrats. For now, I urge a no vote on this joint resolution and yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of the joint resolution, H.J. Res. 88, for amendment. Without objection, the joint resolution will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point, and any amendment offered shall be considered as read. Does any member seek recognition on the joint resolution? Dr. Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman Klein. I'm proud to have introduced this measure, and I'm happy the committee has the opportunity to consider it today. This resolution is our way of honoring a commitment we made more than 5 years ago. Since the Department of Labor issued their first proposal to expand the definition of fiduciary in 2010, we have raised concerns about their approach, not the intent behind the rule, the approach. We agree that retirement advisors should serve their clients' best interests. Ensuring they do so is a worthwhile bipartisan goal. The problem lies in how the department thinks that we should do that. For years, we pointed to the serious consequences of the department's fiduciary rule. We warned the rule would make it harder for low and middle income families to save for retirement. We explained how it would restrict the ability of individuals to receive some of the most basic financial advice. We cautioned that it would create new hurdles for small businesses wanting to offer their workers retirement options, and we made a commitment to families, small business owners, and all Americans trying to plan and save for the future, that we would not sit idly by while the administration advanced such a flawed proposal. In fact, at the very first congressional hearing on the department's proposed fiduciary rule in 2011, I said that we should never lose sight of the real-world impact proposed changes could have on the investments and long-term retirement security of workers and retirees. I also said that we need to challenge any proposal that would make it harder for working families to plan and save for retirement, and that's exactly what we've done. And I might point out, Mr. Chairman, that 29% of the people in this country, 55 and over, have no retirement savings or defined benefit plan, zero. And does anybody in this room think a 1,000-page bill is going to make that more likely to happen for middle-class families? I seriously doubt it. Through letters, hearings, and other oversight efforts, we encouraged the department to withdraw its misguided proposal and go back to the drawing board. Eventually, they did, only to release a similarly flawed proposal last year. Since then, we've continued our efforts to draw attention to the consequences of the latest fiduciary proposal and encourage the department to propose a balanced approach. We even advanced a responsible legislative alternative, which I was proud to introduce. Our bipartisan solution, unlike the department's proposal, would require financial advisors to act in the best interest of their clients and ensure low and middle income individuals have access to quality, affordable retirement advice. Unfortunately, this time around, the department chose to ignore many of the serious bipartisan concerns related to the proposed rule. Instead, they finalized a rule last month that would create consequences working families and job creators cannot afford. That rule is the reason we're here today, to make good on a promise we made years ago to do everything we can to ensure all Americans can retire with the financial security and peace of mind they deserve. Reasoning with the department simply hasn't worked. And so it's time to utilize another tool in the box, the Congressional Review Act. This law allows Congress to pass a resolution of disapproval to prevent the full force of the law, a federal agency from implementing a rule or issuing a substantially similar rule without congressional authorization. The resolution we're considering today is the next step in fulfilling our commitment to deliver the kind of retirement security this country needs. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Are there other members seeking recognition to speak? Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful to Chairman John Klein and Subcommittee Chairman Phil Rowe for their leadership on this crucial issue. Over the past months, I have met with business leaders and financial advisors of the highest integrity throughout the 2nd Congressional District of South Carolina. They have expressed concern about this unworkable, burdensome, and expensive regulation, which will deny services for consumers based on flawed analysis. Americans should look forward to retirement, yet too many find themselves struggling to save for the future. Instead of helping Americans by expanding access to financial advice, the Department of Labor has restricted the definition of a fiduciary. This will disrupt the fiduciary-client relationship of millions of households that depend on retirement advice. This administration's misguided fiduciary regulation will make it harder for small businesses to assist their employees in preparing for retirement, increase cost, and limit choices for those who need this advice the most, American families. I am grateful to support the House Resolution 88, disapproving of the Department of Labor's fiduciary rule. I look forward to continuing to work with our colleagues in the coming months to ensure that American families have access to reliable and affordable advice that they will need to create financial stability in retirement. I urge support of this very positive resolution. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Are there other members seeking recognition? Other members seeking recognition? If there are no other members wishing to speak on the joint resolution, I'll now entertain a motion to report the resolution and recognize Dr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the Committee on Education and the Workforce report the joint resolution, HJ Resolution 88, to the House of Representatives with the recommendation that the joint resolution do pass.
The question is on favorably reporting the joint resolution. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. No. The ayes appear to have it. A recorded vote has been requested.
Mr. Klein?
Thank you. Aye.
Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Wilson? Mr. Wilson votes aye. Mrs. Fox? Mrs. Fox votes aye. Mr. Hunter? Mr. Hunter votes aye. Mr. Rowe? Mr. Rowe votes aye. Mr. Thompson? Mr. Thompson votes aye. Mr. Wahlberg? Mr. Salmon? Mr. Salmon votes aye. Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Guthrie votes aye. Mr. Rokita? Mr. Barletta? Mr. Heck? Mr. Messer? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Bratt? Mr. Bratt votes aye. Mr. Carter? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Grothman? Mr. Grothman votes aye. Mr. Russell? Mr. Corbello? Ms. Stefanik? Mr. Allen? Mr. Allen votes aye. Mr. Scott?
No?
Mr. Scott votes no. Mr. Hinojosa? Mr. Hinojosa votes no. Mrs. Davis? Mrs. Davis votes no. Mr. Grijalva? Mr. Grijalva votes no. Mr. Courtney? Mr. Courtney votes no. Ms. Fudge? Mr. Polis? Mr. Sablon? Ms. Wilson? Ms. Bonamici? Ms. Bonamici votes aye. Ms. Bonamici votes no. Mr. Pocan? Mr. Pocan votes no. Mr. Takano? Mr. Takano votes no. Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Jeffries votes no. Ms. Clark? Ms. Clark votes no. Ms. Adams? Ms. Adams votes no. Mr. Desaulnier?
Will the clerk please call the names of those members who are not yet recorded?
Mr. Wahlberg? Mr. Wahlberg votes aye. Mr. Rokita? Mr. Rokita votes aye. Mr. Barletta? Mr. Heck? Mr. Messer? Mr. Messer votes aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Carter? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Russell? Mr. Corbello? Ms. Stefanik? Ms. Fudge? Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis votes no. Mr. Sablon? Ms. Wilson? Mr. Desaulnier?
How is Mr. Desaulnier recorded?
Mr. Desaulnier votes no.
How is Mr. Bishop recorded?
Mr. Bishop is not recorded. Mr. Bishop? Yes. Mr. Bishop votes aye.
How is Mr. Barletta recorded?
Mr. Barletta is not recorded. Mr. Barletta votes aye.
Considering the simultaneous arrival of several members from the Capitol, let me ask the clerk to again call the names of those members who are not yet recorded.
Mr. Heck? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne votes aye. Mr. Carter? Mr. Carter votes aye. Mr. Russell? Mr. Russell votes aye. Mr. Corbello? Mr. Corbello votes aye. Ms. Stefanik? Ms. Stefanik votes aye. Ms. Fudge? Ms. Fudge votes no. Mr. Sablon? Ms. Wilson?
How is Dr. Heck recorded?
Dr. Heck is not recorded. Mr. Heck votes aye.
Are there any members who wish to change their vote? I was always hoping for Ms. Bonamici, you know, so. That was just a little head fake earlier, I know. The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, there are 22 ayes and 14 noes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. H.J. Resolution 88 is ordered, reported to the House of Representatives. I now recognize Mr. Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request, and I'd first yield to the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that my statement regarding H.J. Resolution 88 be allowed to be entered into the record today.
Without objection, so ordered.
Reclaiming my time, and I'd also ask unanimous consent that several letters, one from Save Our Retirement Coalition, the Consumer Federation of America, and the FL-CIO be entered into the record.
Without objection. The Chair notes for the record that a quorum is present. I now recognize Dr. Rowe.
Ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make necessary and technical changes to the joint resolution and pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2L. I give notice that all members have the requisite number of days to file additional or minority views.
Without objection, so ordered. Committee stands adjourned.